I'm here with Andre Leduc, who is currently Acting Director of both the Business Intelligence and Analysis and Digital Security Policy Directorates at the Canadian Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, until recently known as Industry Canada. My name is Sean Brown. I'm a lawyer with Innovation LLP based here in Ottawa and a member of the Coalition Against Unsolicited Commercial Email. Given my work on privacy, data security, and anti-spam related issues, I've crossed paths with Andre many times in the 15 years or so that we've known each other. And we're sitting here today because Andre is the recipient of the 2016 Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group J.D. Falk Award for his work in leadership on the Operation Safety Net reports, as well as his role in developing Canada's anti-spam legislation, more commonly known as CASL. The J.D. Falk Award seeks to recognize important accomplishments in making a better online world. Through his work on the reports and CASL, Andre has shown a dedication to improving the internet experience and protecting end users in Canada and around the world. Andre has dedicated countless hours to these projects, going far beyond what I think could ever be expected of a government employee. In this way, I think it's fair to say that he embodies the spirit of JD's volunteerism and community building. Earlier in his career at Industry Canada, Andre worked on e-commerce and e-business use model surveys for businesses and consumers, and led working groups at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. In 2004, Andre began working to combat cybercrime, protect consumers, and fight spam and related online threats. By 2005, he became a member of the Group of 8 High-Tech Crime Experts subgroup. In 2009, Andre leveraged his skills and experience dealing with cybercrime to become the lead architect of CASL. From 2008 to 2015, Andre was one of 3 secretariat leads of the London Action Plan, alongside representatives from the US and the UK. Since 2001, Andre has represented Canada at the OECD, the G8, G7, and the Wassenaar Arrangement. Andre holds an MBA from Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC. So Andre, for those who aren't familiar with the Operation Safety Net reports, can you explain briefly what they are?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. The reports not only describe in plain language the online, mobile, and telephony threat environment, in a manner in which most anyone can understand it. They also provide a list of tools and best practices for governments, industry, and consumers to help in the prevention of these types of threats.
Okay, so how did the idea for the reports come about in the first place?
Well, in October of 2011, MAAWG and LAP were appearing in front of the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy regarding the prospect of updating the OECD's anti-spam recommendations to address new and future online threats. At that meeting, I noted while the existing set of OECD spam recommendations were successful in mobilizing industry and governments, there was a need for a new understanding of more up-to-date and more sophisticated next-generation online and mobile threats. The report was to be developed and drafted by volunteers from the London Action Plan, MAAWG, CASL, and other recruits. And it was surprising how well the community came together. Our job at Innovation, Science, and Economic Development was to provide secretariat support. Along with my team, we coordinated the development of the report. At a subsequent MAAWG meeting in June of 2012, we developed the outline of the report and presented that back to the MAAWG board, to the London Action Plan, and to the OECD Consumer Policy Committee. They reviewed the outline and approved it. So then we got to the actual drafting of the report over the summer of 2012, and I'm sure you can imagine what it was like to develop a report of this scope over the course of a summer. Much of the heavy lifting was done by the section leads who drafted up a good portion of the report. My office had responsibilities for editing and publishing the report, and we also held the pen on a few sections. Turning a cohesive, coherent report from multiple editors proved to be a bit of a challenge. But the original report was laid out in 4 sections. So we had a section on malware and botnets, a section on IP and DNS threats, section on phishing and social engineering, and then finally mobile threats. In the fall of 2012, once we completed the report, Neil Schwartzman, John Levine, Alex Bobotek, and I, representing MAAWG and LAP, presented our conclusions and our findings and the report to the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy.
And so I understand there was also a second report.
Yeah, so 2 years later, we undertook to update the report to reflect the changing landscape and the new tools that cyber criminals and malfeasance were using to avoid detection. The second version would include updates to the previous 4 sections, as well as new areas including voice over IP, voice telephony fraud, caller ID spoofing, abuse of hosting and cloud services, and then a supplementary section on online harassment. The process of updating the report involved an invitation being sent back out to MAAWG and LAP members seeking contributors to an updated version of the report. Industry experts were chosen as section leads, and these leads also sought input from members outside of the MAAWG, LAP, and CASL community.
And at a high level, can you speak to what the objectives of the reports were? What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, online activities have changed from the general use of mobile and desktop technology for communications to the use for business, for banking. As we increase commercial use of the internet and mobile environments, new vulnerabilities were evident. In order to stay in front of that changing threat environment, organizations and governments needed to be more proactive in terms of collaboratively monitoring the threats, sharing threat intelligence, and implementing new measures as needed to address an ever-expanding list of online and mobile threats. In this context, as your parents have probably intoned on more than one occasion, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yet in Canada, as it is the case in most jurisdictions, smaller businesses and consumers continue to lag in terms of the adoption of cybersecurity and IT security best practices. It's not something that drives revenue or profit, and as such, cybersecurity and IT security often fall to the back burner for smaller organizations. But Operation Safety Net is a global cooperative effort that included industry experts and government experts outlining the threats facing businesses and consumers in plain language, and it provides them with a toolbox on how to mitigate them. Translating our technical and engineering speak into plain language was probably the most important part of this work. We wanted it to be the type of report a security officer and an engineer in an organization could provide to colleagues or management, and they'd finally be able to understand in detail what these types of cyber attacks were and why they may be targeted. It also needed to go to government policy decision makers in both the developing and developed worlds, those who may not have much of a technical background, and it had to be easy for that community to understand and take action. As many of us are aware, internet and mobile technologies have been key drivers of the global economy over the past 20 years. These technologies impact almost every facet of our day-to-day lives and have been incorporated in almost every business model and supply chain. As our laptops, smartphones, and tablets have become integrated, our dependence on these devices has grown. We use these devices to connect to work, connect with friends and family, shop, bank, and engage with communities. With growing consumer and business dependency and rapid migration of commercial transactions to online and mobile platforms, the threat migrates with cyber criminals. Cyber criminals profit from the sending of spam, phishing, injecting malware into websites, spreading botnets, redirecting internet traffic to malicious websites, hijacking cloud and hosting services, and inserting spyware onto computers. The economic impact of these endless attacks is not easily measured. Victims often won't report the event that has occurred, or the events go underreported. Businesses have a tendency to keep these types of intrusions into their networks close to their chest. The primary focus of these 2 reports was not only to study the threat environment for online, mobile, and VoIP that threaten consumers and businesses, but more importantly, to suggest best practices. It aggregates the anti-abuse industry and policy and regulatory communities' global experience to identify and mitigate these current threats.
So collaboration is obviously essential to addressing these issues. So building on that theme, can you talk a little bit about why the collaboration, the relationship between the London Action Plan and the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group is so important?
Well, collaboration in this space is probably more important than in a lot of other areas. The telecoms or internet service providers, the hosting and cloud service providers, or larger organizations control the information that flows over their networks and the information that's hosted on their servers. And we need to get the business community to have a level of trust with government in this space. They're concerned about legal liabilities. In a case of a network intrusion, they're concerned about the information of their business associates, their consumers. And what we need to develop is a trust relationship where they can approach government and not have to worry about being liable or losing any additional money by sharing information between industry and government. Without the relationship that I developed at MAAWG and LAP, CASL wouldn't have been designed the way it came out either. I was struggling with how to develop articles or clauses within the law that would address man-in-the-middle attacks, network intrusions, and struggling with how do we address malware and the installation of computer programs. I had a multitude of discussions with MAAWG and LAP associates to be able to develop what is now Section 7 and Section 8 in CASL.
Moving on to CASL, I think we should talk a bit more about that accomplishment. CASL came into effect in 2014, so we've now had just over 2 years of experience with it. So in that time, in what we've learned in the past couple of years, do you think it's possible to speak to the impact that CASL has had in that time, both in Canada and possibly outside of Canada?
Well, because the law applies to messages that are received in Canada, the law would apply to any American or European corporation or even an Asian corporation sending commercial electronic messaging into Canada. So what we saw was that there was a high level of compliance, both south of the border and throughout Europe and even in Asia, which meant that everybody now had to get consent prior to the sending of commercial electronic messaging. What we've seen in Canada, and we saw this shortly after the entry into force of CASL, was a decrease of over a third in terms of spam traveling over our networks and landing in Canadians' inboxes.
That's a significant impact. So now with CASL behind you, I understand you've moved on and you're working to develop a new cybersecurity strategy for the Government of Canada. What exactly does that involve?
So right now, led by the Department of Public Safety, we're consulting with Canadians writ large. So there's an opportunity for every Canadian individual or business or industry association to comment on our future plans in terms of developing a cybersecurity strategy. I think the government recognizes it's about gaining additional perspectives, new ideas to address cyber threats. My focus and the focus of innovation, science, and economic development continues to be on how to grow the cybersecurity industry in Canada so that they might be able to respond to the needs of the business community and SMEs particularly. We've been reviewing as well best practices, again, from the United Kingdom, throughout Europe, the United States, even Israel and China, who've developed cybersecurity strategies to protect their own economies.
Great. So before we wrap this up, I think it's important to acknowledge the legacy of J.D. Falk. I didn't know him well. I did have several conversations with him over the years. He was always extremely intelligent, kind, and generous with his time. Can you talk a bit about how J.D. might have influenced your work in this area?
Well, not unlike you, I knew J.D. far less than some longtime MAAWGers and some members of LAP, but I do remember meeting him and spending time with him fondly. I had the pleasure of heading out to dinner on a few occasions with J.D., but I won't forget the first time we headed out for dinner together. I thought that J.D. was soft-spoken, And I remember that he came off as gentle at first, and as we got to know each other a little bit better, I remember feeling that transition from him just trying to get to know me to him being genuinely interested in the work that I was doing on CASL. And then he asked me a kind of a long series of questions. It wasn't that the JD was interrogating me, far from it. He was trying to get as much intelligence and get an understanding of what we were doing in the process so that he could take his expertise and apply it. He just really wanted to help. And he thought that, you know, any information he could give me about how to develop CASL might make the spam law better. So I guess I was fortunate to have met him. I can say he is one of the more impressive people I've met throughout my career. I'm better for having had the opportunity to work with JD through MAAWG, albeit briefly. I'll remember him for someone who wanted to improve the way we use the internet, and those questions that he was asking me was JD just looking to help me.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sitting down today, and congratulations on winning your award.
Thank you.